Hi everyone, welcome to my channel if you're new here, welcome back to my channel if you're a returning viewer or subscriber. Today's video is going to be my October wrap up, talking through all the books I managed to read throughout the month. I actually managed to read 7, which is quite a high number for me, so I think this video is going to take a little while, so I vote that we just get going. So the first book that I read in the month of October was Heart of Silk and Shadows by Lisette Marshall. This is book 0.5 in the, I think it's called the Fae Isles or Fae Isles or something. That's the series name. So this is a little novella that comes before a trilogy, I think, of books. I bought this on Stuff Your Kindle Day, which is this event that happens in September, October, which is basically where a bunch of romance books are free on Kindle. Never any popular titles, but I decided to kind of pick up anything that looked vaguely interesting, which was basically all of the Fae content. I did actually do what the event's title suggested, and I stuffed my Kindle, which means that I've got tons of these kind of like lesser known romantic books on my Kindle, which is a lot of fun, but like I wanted to start getting them going. There was one evening where I was feeling really anxious, and I knew that if I read the book I was actually in the middle of, I wouldn't pay attention to anything I was reading, so I decided to pick up something new, and it was late at night, so I was like, I would love to read my Kindle. Why don't I pick up one of the books I got from Stuff Your Kindle Day? This book has a little bit of a complicated plot, but we are following a human who's living in this Fae kingdom, and classically the humans are a lesser race within this world. Our main character, I think she's called Ali or something like that, starts stealing clothes from the commander general of the Fae. He's like a very, very powerful person within this kingdom. She does this to kind of like get his attention so that she can then do like another thing. It's a bit of a complicated plot, but I thought it was a very kind of well-rounded plot as well. They end up striking this bargain, and it means that they have to prove things to each other. While she's stealing his clothes, he doesn't know who she is, but she leaves notes every single time she takes one of his clothes, basically saying how she outsmarted him. And he actually starts responding to these notes. So the first half of this book, the characters are just communicating in notes. I absolutely loved that aspect. The humor was amazing. There was so much kind of like dry wit and sarcasm. It was so good. I wish that part of the book had actually extended a little bit longer, because at the beginning, like, I was absolutely hooked. I was enjoying the book so much. This book is a little bit spicy. There are a couple of scenes of that nature, but they are so good. This is the first time I've actually seen spice written in a way that was not disgusting, and the characters were not being really possessive, which is such a pleasant surprise. Whenever people say that a book has good spice, I'm just like, really? Is that a thing? But this book proved that it was. The magic system in this book is so incredible. Characters basically can draw magic from colours, and different colours mean different types of magic. It was very, very fascinating, and I think that's something that could be more explored within the actual trilogy of the series. But as this book stands, there are a couple of things in the plot that were quite open-ended by the end of the book, which does make sense because this is a novella. I think the reason why I was in Stuff Your Kindle Day was to like kind of prompt people to then pick up the rest of the series. I had such a fun time with this book, I ended up giving it a 3.5 stars. I'm interested in reading the actual trilogy, but I don't think I'm going to go out of my way to like go and purchase it. But if it does turn up in my life at a decent price, then I will give book 1 a go, because like I said, I did have a lot of fun with this one, and I thought it was a really unique story. The next book that I read in October was Cruel Beauty by Rosamund Hodge. I got just over 100 pages into this one, and I decided to DNF it. 9 times out of 10 when I DNF a book, it's just because I'm bored. When I'm a decent chunk in and I'm feeling bored, I just feel like there's no need to continue the book, because I don't think it's going to be giving me anything more than what it's currently giving me, which was not a lot. Cruel Beauty is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. We follow this girl whose father made a deal with this guy who's called, what is he called? His name's Ignifex. Called like the gentle lord or something like that. Because of this ridiculously selfish deal that her father made, this daughter is like betrothed to this gentle lord, which means that when she turns 18 or something like that, she has to marry him, obviously, because that's what betrothed means. So she turns up at his place, and she is terrified of him. She knows that he has had many wives and he's killed them all. It's like a little bit of like a 1001 Nights retelling as well as Beauty and the Beast. And then things kind of start to get very confusing, but also start to make sense from there. This book had a very strange and a very complex magic system, which is a little bit unusual for YA, but at the same time, this book was published in 2014, and I think that back then people were being a little bit more adventurous with magic. So I found it interesting, but I also was quite confused by it. I feel like we were just kind of dropped into it and nothing was explained. It was almost as if this was like a sequel or like a companion book to a book where those things were established, which was a little bit confusing, and I just didn't really care enough to kind of bother like going back over pages and like rereading them to try and understand the magic system. The other thing is that this book has a religion in it that's inspired by Greek and Roman mythology, so we do talk about like the Greek gods and things like that. I thought that was really interesting. It's meant to be that this land was colonized by the Grecian Roman Empire or something. I can't remember what they call it, but something like that. That whole part was really interesting, but I just didn't care enough about pretty much anything. I thought the main character was really like awful. It did make sense because her family were terrible as well. She has like a twin sister, or I'm not sure that they're twins, but she has a sister, and she just like hated her sister because the sister was like the favorite child, and she was chosen over her to go and marry this guy. I haven't seen the most amazing reviews of this on Goodreads, so I did decide to DNF, and I will be giving this one away. It's currently up on my Depop if anyone's interested. I did get it in a charity shop originally, so I'm not that fast that I didn't gel with this one. Next up, I read a graphic novel called Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen. This book was so cute. I basically got it through the library, so I read it on my phone. I read it in like 2 sittings. Realistically, I could have read it in 1. It was a really short little graphic novel, and it was perfect for the season. So in this book, we're following a witch, and she has a bunch of magical vegetables that she has basically given like life to. They're kind of sentient beings, and they run a vegetable patch, which is a little bit confusing because they're like farming themselves essentially. But while they're doing their little gardening session, they look up on the hill, and there is a grand castle which is uninhabited, but they see smoke coming out the chimney, and all the vegetables are really confused what it is. They go to the witch, and they're like, who could it be in that castle? And she says, oh, it could be the vampire. And they're also really frightened because they sell their vegetables in a market which is for humans. They're anxious about their vampire like preying on the humans, so they think it's in their like it's their responsibility to go and check out what's happening, see if it's a vampire, and also what his intentions are. So of course Garlic, who's this really cute vegetable, she's like a little girl, gets kind of nominated to go and visit him and forced into this. She's very, very shy and anxious anyways, and then because she's seeing a vampire, she is terrified, but she plucks up the courage to go up to the castle, and then the rest of the story ensues. This book is so precious. Garlic is the cutest little thing ever. The art style is beautiful. The color palette was very autumnal. It was perfect for October, perfect for the season. In general, I prefer graphic novels and short stories and things like that to have a little bit of depth. This didn't have a huge amount of that, so I feel like that kind of impacted the rating a little bit. But overall, I did think this was a really lovely story, and I gave it a 3.5 stars, same as, what was that book? Heart of Silk and Shadows. Very different vibe, obviously. There is a sequel to this book called Garlic and the Witch, which confuses me because surely the witch is like the witch we knew from the first story. But anyways, if I can find that one, if I can get my hands on it, I will end up reading it at some point. Really recommend if you're looking for kind of like a seasonal graphic novel. I know it's not spooky season anymore, but it is still autumn, and I think it's still appropriate for the season. The next book I read in October, the next book I finished in October because I believe I started this one in September, was Either Or by Elif Batuman. This is my most anticipated read for the year. If you didn't know this already, this is the sequel to The Idiot, which was both my favourite book of last year and is currently standing as my favourite book of all time. So as you can imagine, I was so excited when I received this one for my birthday from my brother's fiance. Tiffany, if you're watching, thank you so much. It was so much appreciated, and yeah, I don't know how I could have waited longer to read this book, to be honest. This book came out in hardcover last year and the paperback released this year, so I've been waiting to get my hands on it. So The Idiot follows Salin. She is a Harvard student and she's in her first year. She becomes kind of infatuated with this boy called Ivan, who's in her Russian class, I believe. Or I think he's in a couple of her classes. I don't know. Anyways, she becomes infatuated with him in a very unhealthy way. Her love for him is completely unrequited, and he's basically just messing with her. This book is set in the 90s. Even though they're in the same class, they communicate with each other mostly over email, which means they're kind of enamored by each other's kind of online persona, not so much who they are in real life. So I think Sally is obviously very young and naive and everything like that. So in book 2, we're following Sally throughout her second year of Harvard, and I believe we're going to get books 3 and 4 which follow her throughout her third and fourth year as well. That would be stunning. Didn't feel like this was an ending for Sally. Without spoiling anything too much, Ivan has graduated and he is now all the way over the other side of the country, and he's on the west coast, which means that Sally is now apart from him. Unfortunately, this book didn't have the same spark that The Idiot had. In the last like kind of 50 to 100 pages, there was one moment that made me feel the exact same way that The Idiot did, but it came so late and it was also just like one moment. The author obviously knew that she did something great with The Idiot. I always felt her trying to like recreate the incredible kind of humour and that smart writing and not quite managing to get it there. On top of that, Ivan not being there meant that Salin's kind of longings for him seemed, I don't know, uninteresting to read about, or just like a little bit pointless. In the first book I was like, Salin, for goodness sake, you need to like get over him, but at the same time I kind of like empathized with her a little bit. But in this book I was just like, girl, he lives on the other side of the country, you're basically never going to see him again, he's not responding to your emails, like you need to get over him. And by the end of the book she kind of did, but I'm sorry about the lighting, it's got very dark in here because it's just started raining. The kind of like last 50% of this book, or 25% or something, becomes a lot about sex, and it's not in like a smutty way, more physically what that's like for Salin, and kind of like a little bit emotionally as well. The tone of this book was much more about casual hookups than this like lengthy kind of longing that Salin had for Ivan in the first book. Overall I gave this book a 4 stars. I think it's still great. I think I would really love it if I hadn't read The Idiot first, if this hadn't been like a sequel. I feel like I definitely was kind of comparing it to the first book and I just couldn't, it probably just couldn't ever live up to that, to be honest with you. But even so, even when I tried to be a little bit objective about it, I still felt like there was something off about it. So overall I gave it 4 stars. 4 stars remains an incredible rating. I just, you know, I don't feel like disappointed by this book, but it just wasn't the idiot, is what I'm trying to say. Next up, I finally read It by Alexa Chung. This is a book that, how old was I when this book came out? When did this book even come out? 2013. This is a book that my 2013-year-old self would have sworn she'd never pick up. This was all over Tumblr, all over We Heart It and Pinterest, all of that. Like, I just associate this with like the Valencia filter on Instagram. You know the one that like was like, you know that one. But over the past few years, since about 2021, 2020, I became obsessed with Alexa Chung. I think she's great. Her fashion's amazing, but also she's just like the ultimate kind of it girl. Definitely such like a generational figure. When I was a teenager, she was absolutely it. This book has pretty kind of rough reviews on Goodreads, but I would say the main takeaway from this book is that the girls who get it, and the girls who don't. This is the absolute definition of that beautiful saying that many wise women have said before me. I do want to preface this by saying that I've been watching a lot of Alexa's old interviews, also her videos that she had on her YouTube channel. She stopped doing that a couple of years ago, but that was what originally inspired me to pick this book up. But it also meant that going into it, when I was reading the book, I definitely heard her voice, like reading it to me in my head. This book definitely matches her humor. You can read her in it. I didn't just like hear her, I felt this book was very her. And I know that this is not like a hugely amazing piece of literature. I would be hugely surprised if this book was actually ghostwritten, because it just felt so Alexa, which I loved. This book also felt kind of tongue-in-cheek, which is amazing, because if you are familiar with who Alexa is, she doesn't take herself too seriously, and therefore this book was not taking itself too seriously either, which is so fun. So when she's giving you all these tips on how to, like, I don't know, get over a breakup, or what staples to have in your closet, all these things like that, you're definitely having to read it like not as like actual advice, but more so a little kind of bible of who she is and what she is like. This just felt very naturally Alexa, and I enjoyed it, so I gave it 5 stars. I know, one of my few 5-star reads. I couldn't fault it. There was nothing wrong with this book. I think people who are giving it low ratings are judging it wrongly. Either not familiar with her going into this book, or they have the wrong view of her. I think this is just her personality in a book, and it's amazing when you kind of read it knowing that. I also got a lot of movie recs from this, which is fun. The next day I was just like immediately in my like Alexa style fits, because she's an icon, what can I say? The next book that I read in October was Ricochet by Krista and Becca Ritchie. This is the second book in the Addicted series. I'm filming individual one-book focused reading vlogs for each of the books in this series. So far I've done the first book, and obviously I did the second book, so I'll have that video linked if you're interested in it. Because I've got like 28 minutes of footage talking to you about exactly how I feel about this book, I don't think I'm going to go into a lot of depth here, but I will quickly tell you what the series is about. So Addicted to You, the first book, follows Lily and Lo. I think they're in their very early 20s. Lily is addicted to sex and Lo is addicted to alcohol. They've both been kind of enabling each other by hiding their addictions through fake dating from their families. This series is known for its found family, which is one of my favorite things to read about in books, so that's the reason why I originally gravitated towards this series. I love these characters. I think by the end of the series I'm gonna be absolutely obsessed. It already felt so nice going to book 2, being able to catch up with them again, because I'd left a long time between reading the first book and the second. I read the first book I think back in February. My concept of time is non-existent right now. The writing is still not great, but I have a feeling that it's not gonna improve throughout the rest of the series. Something I'm kind of like having to ignore as much as possible and just enjoy the series for everything else that it is. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 stars. I gave the first book a 3 stars, so I did prefer this book a little bit more. I felt like it helped that this book's shorter. You kind of just got straight to the point. There wasn't so much filler, and I also think that was partially because I was more attached to the characters because I've just been with them longer. The one problem with this book, this would have been a 4 if it hadn't been from this thing, is that this book depicts the beginnings of a relationship while the characters are underage. So in this book we have Reich. He is a friend of Lily and Lo's, and he is 22. There are various moments throughout this book where he flirts with Daisy, who is Lily's younger sister, and at this point in time Daisy is 15. So a 22-year-old flirting with a 15-year-old, not great. The problem is that by the end of this series, Reich and Daisy are in a relationship. I'm told that this doesn't happen until Daisy is very much of age, and the characters actually don't sleep together until Daisy's over 18, I believe. And honestly, if Daisy had been 18 in this book and Reich had been like 7 years older, or however big the age gap is, that would have been fine. Couldn't care less. But it's the fact that she's underage and Reich is flirting with her, and it's in his power to not do that. It was a bit of a mess. I do fully review it in the vlog that I filmed of this book. That video is also spoiler free for this book, but it does contain slight spoilers for book 1. I'd maybe not watch that if you hadn't read book 1 already. I felt like it was wrong to give this book like a high rating when that was a thing, but I did thoroughly enjoy other aspects of it, so I settled with a 3.5. But sometimes filming wrap-ups is such a struggle. I've written so many notes myself, but I'm still like stumbling over all of my words constantly. We're on to the final book though. So the final book that I read in the month of October was Minor Detail by Adania Shibli. I watched this like 5-minute video just so I could pronounce the author's name correctly. So I believe I said that right, but don't hate me if I didn't, because I've been trying to search for the correct pronunciation and it's kind of difficult to find. This is a piece of translated literature, translated by Elizabeth Jacquet. This book has kind of special circumstances surrounding it. That's why I originally picked it up. So recently there's been an event called the Frankfurt Book Fair. There are many book fairs all throughout the world, but Frankfurt is Germany's book fair. It's a very big like kind of hub for publishers, rights managers and things like that to meet and to share books, share ideas and make books happen. Frankfurt Book Fair had an event scheduled, which was kind of like a celebration of minor detail, which was going to have a talk by the author, all of that stuff. Due to the current affairs, Israelis and Palestinians, Frankfurt Book Fair thought it was best to cancel the event. I understand a little bit better if this had come from a place of like, you know, we're anxious for the safety of the author, for the safety of the crowd, the other people who will be at the event. But the way that the announcement was given did not seem like that was the motivating factor for it. It's kind of funny because I studied publishing at university and a huge chunk of the course was on censorship. Censorship is something you kind of look at as being something that existed in the 1950s, 1970s even, but not something that's modern day. And this was just the most blatant form of it. It was covering up this woman's success and this woman's history and this woman's messaging within this little novella, specifically hiding her voice at a time where it needed to be heard. So as a result of this, the absolutely wonderful Fitzcarraldo Editions, which is one of my favourite little indie publishers based out of London, they decided to make this book free on Kindle, or free on e-readers. I think it was available on like Kobo and things like that. While they were losing kind of like monetary sales, they also did boost sales because tons of people decided to pick up this book, and I was one of those people who did. So like I said, this is a little novella. It's split in two parts. The first part's told in third person. It follows an Israeli soldier as he is hunting Palestinians with his, what's the word, his unit. He's like one of the people in charge of these soldiers, and that's taking place a year after the Nakba. And then the other 50%, the latter half of this book, it follows a Palestinian woman in kind of like modern day as she kind of faces the realities of living under Israeli surveillance. The writing was a little bit basic, it was nothing special, but it is a translated piece of work, so it's kind of hard for me to judge the book on that front. I thought that the different narration styles worked really well in this book. I think I've already said, but the first part was told in third person and the second part was told in first person, so the two parts felt very distinct and also made a lot of sense because it was written by a Palestinian author, so she was able to write the part about a Palestinian in first person and the part about the Israeli in third person because she was not identifying with that character. The second part of this book did get quite repetitive, but I thought that also not only played into the amount of control that the Israelis have over the Palestinians in their day-to-day life of what the Israeli occupation is like, but it also helped with the impact of the kind of like abruptness of the ending. The ending is so striking and intense, but in like such a kind of concentrated way, and what an ending. It was so powerful, it made so much sense for the story. The impact was a little like you were there experiencing it for yourself, like you were watching from the sidelines. This book does have many trigger warnings. I'll have them all listed down below if you are interested, if you'd like to know what you're getting yourself into by picking up this book, but it just kind of alludes to those things. It's not very graphic. There's one aspect of it that's a little bit graphic, which I'll put like a star next to or something down below, but the rest of it was not very much like on page, which I think was good because it didn't seem like it was just this kind of like trauma porn. It felt like it was actually delivering the punches without sensationalizing them. So that's Minor Detail. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really do recommend it. I think Fitzcarraldo were amazing for making this book free and kind of like encouraging people to pick it up after the absolute disgrace of the Frankfurt Book Fair. So there you go, those are the 7 books that I read in the month of October. I'm absolutely exhausted. This is a very long video. If you enjoyed this, please make sure to give it a thumbs up because that's how I can tell that you did. But without further ado, I'm going to leave you in peace and I'll see you in a couple of days for another video. Bye bye.